The school bell rang, but inside room 3B, it wasn't the usual chatter of students ready to start another day. No, today was different. It was the day everyone had been waiting for. "All right, class," Mr. Taylor announced, a smug grin playing on his lips. "We all know the genius is back today." He gestured toward the back of the room where a lone desk sat empty. "But let's see if he's still got it." There was a collective murmur. Whispers filled the air, but no one dared say anything out loud. The class knew better than to challenge Mr. Taylor, especially when he had his sights set on someone. And then, as if on cue, the door creaked open. The 12-year-old prodigy Adam shuffled in, his eyes downcast. His school uniform was wrinkled, his hair tousled from a week away. But it wasn't just his absence that had everyone talking. It was the riddle, the impossible riddle, he'd left unsolved before his sudden break. "Adam," Mr. Taylor smirked, holding up a piece of paper. "Remember this?" He tossed it onto Adam's desk. "Maybe you've had enough time to figure it out now. Solve this riddle or you'll never live it down." The riddle stared up at Adam, its words a challenge, a test of his intellect that had already humiliated him once before. The entire class was watching. Adam had been absent for a week, an entire week that had fueled rumors and speculation about what had happened to him. But now the tension in the air was palpable. Would he crumble under the pressure, or would he solve the riddle in front of everyone, proving once and for all that he was the genius they all feared? The school was old, too old, some would say. The walls, once a bright cream, were now weathered with years of dust and handprints, marking the passage of time. It wasn't the newest or most prestigious school in the district, but for Adam, it was home. The smell of freshly sharpened pencils, mixed with the faint scent of musty textbooks and chalk dust. It was a scent he knew well, one that had comforted him through every semester, every quiz, and every failure he had to endure. Adam's desk, the one that was now empty and abandoned, sat near the back of room 3B, tucked between rows of students, who often ignored him. The lights buzzed above, flickering occasionally, like the school itself couldn't decide whether to be awake or asleep. Outside, the sun fought to peek through the smudged windows, casting long shadows across the classroom. The other kids in his class, their faces mostly unremarkable, but their laughter always too loud, had never really understood Adam. He didn't look like the kind of kid who should stand out. His glasses were always slightly crooked, his shoes never polished, his hair too long, unkempt. At first glance, he looked just like any other student, a quiet, average 12-year-old boy. But Adam wasn't average, and that was what terrified them. To the others, Adam was an anomaly. He was a puzzle they couldn't solve. He had always been the quiet kid at school, and for the most part, people didn't notice him. They didn't see his brilliance. They saw only his awkwardness, his inability to socialize, his hesitance to raise his hand, the way he always stared out the window during break, lost in thought. In their eyes, he was the outsider, the kid who didn't belong. But Adam never cared. His thoughts were different from theirs, and that was fine by him. Adam's mind moved faster than the world around him could keep up. It was both a blessing and a curse. He often wondered what it would feel like to be normal, to blend in with the crowd, to not have the weight of genius hanging over his head like an ever-present shadow. But then he would snap back to reality, and the loneliness would creep in again. Most kids spent their free time on video games or gossiping about the latest trends. Adam spent his time solving problems, searching for answers that others didn't even know existed. He'd go home every day to his small apartment alone, with only his books and puzzles for company. His mother, a single parent, was always working late at her job as a nurse. So Adam filled the silence with his thoughts, and when he couldn't find a solution to a problem, he would dream up a new one. He wasn't just good at math or science. He was great. He saw patterns where others saw chaos, solved equations that looked like gibberish to most of his peers. But none of that mattered. None of it mattered until Mr. Taylor, his teacher, had given him that riddle. The riddle that had haunted him for days. Now, as Adam sat down in his seat, the room seemed smaller, tighter, his classmates watching him with a mix of anticipation and smug amusement. He could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their judgment, pressing down on him like the very walls of the school. They thought he was just the quiet kid, the one who couldn't speak up or stand out. But they didn't know Adam. They didn't know the part of him that could solve the unsolvable, the part of him that never gave up, no matter how impossible the challenge. And today, in front of all of them, Adam was about to show them exactly who he was. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before. Tick, 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 the second hand moving in a rhythmic cadence that seemed to mirror the pounding in Adam's chest. He sat there, staring at the riddle in front of him. His hands were clammy, his palms slick against the desk. He could feel the heat of the classroom pressing down on him, his classmates' eyes trained on him, waiting. Mr. Taylor leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his face twisted into an expression of smug anticipation. The teacher's voice was slow and deliberate as he spoke, each word a sharp jab aimed directly at Adam's confidence. "So, Adam," Mr. Taylor began, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "you've had a week to think about this. I'm sure you've cracked it by now. You are the genius, after all." He chuckled, and the sound felt like nails on a chalkboard. Adam's heart thudded harder. The mockery, the subtle jab at his intelligence, it wasn't new. Mr. Taylor had always made it clear that he didn't think much of Adam's quiet demeanor or his reluctance to show off. But today it felt sharper. Today there was an edge to his words, a challenge that seemed impossible to ignore. Adam swallowed hard. His throat was dry, his thoughts muddled. It wasn't the riddle itself that made his palms sweat. It was the weight of the eyes watching him, the pressure mounting as each second passed in silence. What if he failed? What if he couldn't solve it? What would that say about him? The genius who couldn't solve a simple riddle. The riddle taunted him, its words dancing on the page like a puzzle too complex for anyone to piece together. He had spent hours with it the night before, even after his mom had gone to bed, her soft snores filling the apartment. He had thought through every possible answer, tried every angle, every possible connection, but nothing made sense. Nothing fit. His mind began to race, spinning with the weight of expectations. His classmates, who had never truly understood him, were watching with expectant faces. They didn't know what it was like to be him, the feeling that everyone, everywhere, was waiting for you to slip up, waiting for the moment when you would be exposed as just another kid with no real place in the world. A bead of sweat formed on his forehead. He could hear the whispers now, the snickers of his classmates, the judgment in their eyes. They were waiting for him to fail, waiting to see him crumble under the pressure. I need a minute," Adam muttered under his breath, pushing the riddle away, but it didn't stop. The pressure was still there, suffocating him, wrapping around his chest like a vice. He couldn't escape it. But what was worse, failing here in front of everyone, or walking away and letting them think he couldn't do it? He rubbed his temples, trying to calm his thoughts. If he didn't solve this riddle, it would be another. Failure on top of all the others. Another reminder that no matter how much he tried, no matter how hard he worked, he would always be the kid who wasn't quite enough. But Adam wasn't going to let that happen. Not today. He couldn't let the anxiety control him. As he closed his eyes, he whispered to himself, "I can do this." Adam sat frozen, the riddle before him like a giant wall. His mind, usually sharp and quick, now felt as if it were lost in a fog. He could feel the pressure mounting, the heat in the room, the ticking of the clock, and worst of all, the stares of his classmates. He hadn't asked for this moment, but here it was, inescapable. It wasn't that Adam didn't know how to solve the riddle. He had solved much harder problems before. The issue wasn't the riddle. It was the fear. Fear of failure. Fear of letting down the people who had always expected him to be the one who had all the answers. His thoughts drifted reluctantly to the past. It wasn't the first time he had been under pressure. He remembered the first time he had solved a complex equation in third grade, the way his teacher had stared at him, wide-eyed. Adam, how did you... She had stammered, clearly unsure how to process what she had just seen. But the most memorable part wasn't the teacher's surprise. It was the way the other kids had looked at him. Some had whispered, some had stared, but the one thing he remembered most clearly was the strange feeling in the pit of his stomach, the uncomfortable realization that being good at something meant standing out, and standing out meant being different. Ever since that day, Adam had lived in a world where he never quite belonged. He had always felt like he was on the outside, watching everyone else live their lives, while he was stuck in the overwhelming chaos of his own mind. His internal struggle raged on as he sat there in the classroom. Should he try to solve the riddle, or should he let it go? He wasn't sure if he could stand the idea of failing in front of everyone. The thought of having the whole class laugh, the snickers, the mocking, that made his stomach churn. But the alternative, to back down now, he would never hear the end of it. As Adam fidgeted with the edge of his notebook, Mr. Taylor's voice cut through the room again, sharper this time. "Come on, Adam, surely you've solved it by now. Or are you too busy to care?" The words stung, and Adam could feel his cheeks burn with a mixture of anger and shame. Why did Mr. Taylor have to push him like this? Why couldn't he just let it go? His classmates, most of them oblivious to the pressure he was under, were already starting to murmur among themselves. Some were watching him intently, like hawks waiting to see their prey fall. Others seemed bored, already losing interest in the riddle altogether. But then there were a few who, like Sarah, were looking at him with a hint of something else, something that made Adam pause. Sarah was one of the few people who didn't treat him like a puzzle to be solved or a source of mockery. She had always been kind to him, offering quiet encouragement when everyone else was too busy whispering behind his back. In a world where Adam felt like an outsider, Sarah was the only one who had never judged him. She caught his eye from across the room and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't much, just a brief acknowledgement. But it was enough. It reminded him of a conversation they'd had after school one day, months ago, when Adam had been practicing equations, in the corner of the playground, trying to solve a problem that no one else in his grade could figure out. Sarah had sat beside him, watching him in silence, and after a long pause she had simply asked, "How do you do it, Adam?" At the time, Adam hadn't been sure how to answer. He had never been able to explain his ability to think through problems the way he did. It wasn't something that could be taught or replicated. It was just part of him. But he remembered what he had said to her then. "I don't know. I just see things differently, I guess." Now, as he sat in the classroom, with the riddle before him and the weight of everyone's expectations bearing down on him, he wished he could be as sure of himself as Sarah seemed to be. The tension in the room seemed to grow thicker by the second. Adam's hands trembled as he stared at the riddle again. His mind flashed back to the countless hours he had spent alone at home, away from the noise of the world, solving problem after problem, sometimes even creating his own. Late at night, when the world was asleep, Adam would push himself to work through increasingly difficult equations, often finding solutions that even his teachers had been impressed by. But no one saw that side of him, the side where he could sit quietly, head down, and immerse himself in the beauty of a perfect solution. No one knew the hours he spent, alone with his thoughts, just trying to escape the fear of being different. The bell rang, signaling the end of the period, but Adam didn't move. He couldn't, not yet. As the other kids started to pack up their things, he stayed rooted to his seat, the riddle still in front of him. He knew what he had to do. He could feel the pull of his hidden talent, the part of him that had always been his alone, and, for the first time in a long time, Adam was ready to face it. The fear was still there, but now there was something else, determination. He wasn't just going to solve this riddle, he was going to prove to everyone that being different wasn't something to be ashamed of. The silence in the room was suffocating. It hung in the air like a thick fog, pressing in from every direction. Adam's heart hammered in his chest, each beat louder than the last. His fingers were trembling so violently that he had to fight to keep them steady on the edge of the desk. His gaze was fixed on the riddle in front of him, the paper blurring slightly as his vision wavered between the puzzle and the expectation of everyone watching. Mr. Taylor's voice broke the silence. Once more, a quiet but biting command. "Well, what are you waiting for?" The weight of the teacher's words, the challenge that hovered over him, felt like a heavy iron chain wrapped around his chest. He wanted to run, wanted to escape the room and the eyes that burned into him from every corner, but he couldn't. Not this time. Adam closed his eyes for a moment, the air around him thick with tension. His mind raced, searching desperately for clarity, for a way out, but there was no way out, not now, not after everything he had been through. "I can't fail," he thought. "I won't." He remembered the first time he had truly faced a challenge like this, back when he had solved that impossible equation in 3rd grade. He had been scared then, too, terrified of the idea that he might make a mistake, that he might not measure up. But he had done it. Somehow, he had pulled it off. And now, as he faced this moment with every eye in the room on him, it was that same fear that gripped him, but it was different this time. This time, the fear wasn't just about the riddle. It wasn't about the chance to prove himself. It was about something deeper, something he had never fully confronted before. It was about the fact that every time he succeeded, every time he showed his brilliance, he felt a little more alone. The kids in his class had never understood him. They didn't understand why he spent hours buried in his books, solving problems that no one else cared about. They didn't know what it was like to live inside his mind, to constantly feel like an outsider, a puzzle that no one could quite solve. But today was different. He couldn't let them define him anymore. Slowly, Adam stood up, his knees slightly shaking as he made his way to the front of the class. The floor beneath him seemed to stretch out in front of him, each step a battle against the mounting pressure. He could feel the weight of the stairs, the quiet whispers, the judgment, all of it swirling around him like a storm. "I'm not going to let them win," he thought fiercely, planting his feet firmly on the ground. "This is my moment. I control this." Adam reached the desk, the riddle still waiting for him. His mind flickered to all the late nights he had spent alone, solving equations in the dim light of his room. The hours spent trying to push the limits of his abilities, testing himself over and over again. It wasn't just about solving problems, it was about escaping the noise of the world, about finding peace in the logic and order of mathematics. But now, in this moment, he knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about the riddle anymore. This was about proving something deeper to himself, that he wasn't defined by his isolation, that he wasn't just the kid who sat in the back of the class. He was more than that. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. His hands hovered over the paper, ready to begin. Focus. "This is just another problem," he reminded himself. "I've solved harder problems than this." His fingers brushed against the edges of the paper, and his mind snapped into focus. The riddle suddenly felt clearer, the pieces falling into place as though they had always been there, waiting for him to see them. As his hand moved across the paper, solving the puzzle with methodical precision, the classroom seemed to fade away. The ticking of the clock, the whispers of his classmates, all of it disappeared into the background. There was only the riddle and the quiet hum of his mind working at full capacity. The solution was unfolding before him, one step at a time. It wasn't just the satisfaction of solving the riddle. It was the realization that he had done it, that he had proven something to himself that went far beyond this classroom, beyond this moment. But just as he reached the final steps, the room seemed to shrink again. A voice cut through his focus. "That's it. That's your answer." Mr. Taylor's voice was low, dripping with disbelief. The words hung in the air like a challenge, but Adam didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. "I know I'm right," he thought, locking eyes with Mr. Taylor. His breath was slow and steady now, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of his heart. For a long moment, no one moved. The entire room was still, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Then slowly, Adam lifted his hand from the paper. His fingers were still trembling, but there was a quiet triumph in his eyes. Mr. Taylor looked at the paper, his eyes narrowing. The silence stretched on, and then, without a word, he looked back at Adam. "Well," Mr. Taylor said after a long pause, his voice barely audible, "I guess you got it right." The words hit Adam like a wave crashing against the shore. For a second it felt like time had stopped. The pressure, the tension, it all vanished in an instant, replaced by a strange, overwhelming sense of relief. But as he turned to face the class, Adam saw something he hadn't expected. The whispers had stopped. The mocking expressions were gone. In their place was something else, something unspoken, respect. The room was still. The silence that had engulfed it moments before hung heavier now, but it wasn't filled with the same tension. No, this was different. It was filled with something new, something Adam hadn't anticipated. Respect. His classmates, who had once whispered behind his back, now stared at him with wide eyes, their mouths hanging open in disbelief. It wasn't the mockery they had expected. It was awe. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The clock ticked on, its rhythmic sound suddenly too loud in the oppressive silence. Adam's pulse raced, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming flood of emotions that washed over him. Relief, surprise, and a quiet, unexpected sense of triumph. He could feel it before he even turned around. Sarah's eyes on him, her gaze not one of pity or amusement, but something far deeper. She was the only one who had truly believed in him. And now, for the first time, Adam felt like he had truly earned that belief. His heart was still pounding in his chest, but it wasn't the same anxious pounding from earlier. Now, it was something else, something that felt like a victory, like the first breath after holding your head underwater for too long. And then, slowly, the first reaction came, a single clap. It was tentative at first, uncertain, coming from the back of the room, where Luke, one of the popular boys, sat. But then a few more followed, soft at first, like a ripple across a pond, and then louder, stronger. One by one the class began to clap. It wasn't loud, but it was genuine. The sound of it was like a weight lifting off Adam's shoulders, the weight that had been crushing him for so long. Mr. Taylor stood at the front, his arms still crossed, but now there was something different in his posture. It wasn't the smugness that had been there before. It was a subtle shift, the lowering of his defenses. He didn't say anything, but his expression softened just for a moment. The pride, the doubt, the challenge, they were all gone now, replaced with something else. A quiet acknowledgement. Adam had expected mockery. He had prepared for the snickers and the whispered remarks, but none came. Instead, he felt the full weight of his classmates' eyes on him, no longer dismissive or condescending. They were watching him with respect. They were seeing him for who he truly was. As the applause died down, the room seemed to breathe again. The air no longer felt heavy, but light, filled with a sense of release. Adam finally let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Luke, who had clapped first, gave him a nod. "That was impressive," he said, his voice awkward but sincere. It wasn't the kind of compliment Adam was used to hearing, and that's exactly what made it so powerful. Sarah smiled at him from across the room, her eyes filled with quiet pride. Adam didn't need words from her. He could see it in her face. For the first time, Adam realized something important. He wasn't alone, and he wasn't just the quiet kid, the prodigy locked away in his own world anymore. No, now he was something else, something that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, the kid who belonged. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, but Adam remained seated at his desk for a few extra moments, his hands still resting on the paper where he had solved the riddle. The applause had faded, the room had emptied, but the weight in his chest, once so heavy, had been replaced by something light, something freeing. He could still hear the faint echoes of the clapping in his mind, but now they seemed like a distant memory. Adam wasn't the same person who had walked into the room that morning. The fear, the doubt, the overwhelming pressure of always being. The genius. They had all melted away in the face of his own triumph. He had faced the challenge head-on, and he had come out victorious. But more than that, he had proven something far more important to himself. He wasn't defined by the expectations others had for him. He was more than just the kid who solved problems. He was a person with his own worth, his own path. As he packed his bag, Sarah came over to him, a soft smile on her face. "That was amazing," she said, her voice warm. "You showed them what you're really capable of." Adam gave her a shy smile in return, feeling the words settle into his heart like a warm light. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged, not because of what he could do, but because of who he was. The classroom had changed for him in that one moment. No longer did he feel like an outsider, as if he was constantly battling to prove something to everyone. He had finally realized that it didn't matter what they thought. What mattered was what he believed about himself. And now he had the courage to see his own worth. When he walked out of the classroom, he didn't look back. The journey ahead would be different. He was no longer just the quiet prodigy. He was Adam, and that was enough. Adam's story is a reminder that the greatest challenges we face are often the ones inside our own minds. Don't let fear or doubt define you. Embrace who you truly are, and the rest will follow. If you found inspiration in Adam's journey, share your thoughts in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more stories of triumph and self-discovery. What will you prove to yourself today?